Yes, my name is Roger, initial E for Edward Stembridge, and I reside in Milledgeville, Georgia. Have lived there for about 15 years and previously lived in Texas for about 15 years. And previously to that, I lived in Athens, Georgia, where I was on the faculty at the University of Georgia teaching technical industrial education. And prior to that, I guess lived for a while in Roswell, Georgia when I was teaching high school at Sandy Springs High School. And before that, I was born and raised in Hateville, Georgia, and attended Russell High School in Eastmont, Georgia, which was about 2 miles from where I lived. And after graduating from Russell High School, I had really wanted to go to Georgia Tech, but when I was senior in high school, my father died, and that kind of squashed that desire. So I joined the Navy.
All right. Well, that's kind of the next question. How did you come to join the military service, and what years did you serve?
Actually, a good friend of mine in high school was interested in naval aviation, and he joined the Reserve Naval Aviation organization in, I think it was in Chamblee, Georgia, and he talked me into going out and talking to them, and I ended up joining. And a month after I joined, I said, naval aviation is not my interest, and I had been working for a automobile engine rebuilder at a pitiful salary, and it was just something that I couldn't see myself doing for very long. So I said, well, I can probably earn as much money in the Navy as I am earning there, so at least I can possibly do something about my education from the Navy. So I joined the Navy and got credit for 1 or 2 months of naval service as a reservist, and had to get a discharge and go through the business of being recruited again. And went to the naval recruiters and happened to run into one of my Russell High School classmates who was probably in a similar situation as me, and he was going to join the Navy, and then lo and behold, we found another person that I knew from my childhood and lived in Hateville. He was joining the Navy, so the three of us kind of got together, and we agreed to stay together and go to basic training together and so forth. So that started my career in the Navy.
And what years did you serve?
I graduated from high school in 1948 at the tender age of 16, and reached my 17th birthday in December of that year, and I joined the Navy in the following March. So I was 17 years old. My mother had to sign for me to join at age 17 in 1949.
And what boat did you qualify on, and what year was that?
After basic training, I was sent to diesel engineman school, and from diesel engineman school in San Diego, I was sent to the submarine base at Pearl Harbor, and I worked there for almost a year, and then having contact with submariners throughout that period, I applied for submarine school and was accepted, and that I spent just about the entire year of 1950 at Pearl Harbor, and then went to New London, Connecticut in January of '51, submarine school, and then submarine diesel school, and was assigned to the USS Conger, SS 477, as my first boat. And however, before I left submarine school, I made application to the Naval Academy, and so I went to the Conger, and I started immediately on my qualification process, and had virtually completed my qualification procedures at that time, and when I was called up to the captain's office and said, we've got orders to send you to the Naval Academy. So I left all of my qualification materials, all of my drawings and notes and everything there on the Conger, and I thought, well, you know, maybe I'll have a chance to go back and finish this one day, but I never did actually get qualification on the Conger. Technically, I think I could have passed their requirements for it, but I got shipped off to the Naval Academy, and they said, we want you to go through a year of in the Naval Academy prep school. I said, well, you know, I've had 4 years of ROTC in high school, and I had a very decent GPA, score from high school. Why do I need to go to a prep school? And I said, well, this kind of, to get you in shape to be able to perform things that you'll have to, conform to at the academy. So I said, okay. So I spent a year at the prep school, and before graduation, I was told that if I went through the graduation, I would go immediately to the Naval Academy. And I said, well, I've decided that I do not want a degree in marine engineering, which was the only degree available at that time. And I said I would really prefer to just go back to the Navy and finish my enlistment, and then go to school as a civilian, which is what they agreed to let me do. And so they sent me back to submarines, and I went to the USS Burfish, SSR 312. It's a radar picket submarine. And I immediately went back through the qualification process and did my qualification and became a qualified submariner on the Burfish, and spent the rest of my enlistment on the Burfish, and took an examination for engineman third class and got that on the first try, which I knew I would. I was just very good at that sort of thing. So, and came out and started night school at the old University of Georgia Evening Division in Atlanta, Georgia. Started taking classes there and working in the daytime at various jobs, just enough to survive with, and eventually got my bachelor's degree. By that time, the Atlanta Division, University of Georgia, had progressed to become Georgia State College, and so my degree is from Georgia State College. And after I received my degree, I started teaching math and physics in high school, and did that for several years, and was offered a job with the technical programs in Atlanta, and they were building a new technical school, and they liked my background, and so eventually I went to work for the technical programs at a temporary location called Hoke Smith Technical School, and I was the evening school director there, and I guess a couple of years at that location they had completed the new Atlanta area technical school, which was at that time was the largest technical school in the United States, and became the assistant director of the school there, and started work on my master's degree at the University of Georgia. And when I finished the master's program, the department head of Department of Industrial Education asked me if I would come over and teach for them, which I agreed to do. So I spent a number of years teaching in the Department of Industrial Education and working on my doctorate, and got my doctorate, and then eventually moved out to Texas and taught in a college out there, and spent a number of years teaching, and finally retiring and did consulting work. Moved back to Georgia.
And here we are.
That's it.
Okay, can you tell us about your job duties on board the subs?
I was always an engineman. Of course, the first job I had when I went on board the Conqueror was what they call mess cooking. Had to, assist the cooks in making sure that everybody got fed and cleaned up after them and so forth. But that was a standard tour for new submarine wannabes, and but after that I was assigned to the forward engine room, and as an oiler, and my job was to clean the oil filters and wipe the oil off the engines and do this and do that, and all the various things that were required to keep the engine room looking nice and running efficiently. And when I went back to the Burrfish, I was again assigned to the forward engine room, and by that time I had progressed to the point that I had a crow on my arm, so I was given the forward engine room as the master of that department, and I could order somebody else around to do the oiling and the filter changing and picking up all the trash that got deposited and so forth.
And what boats were you on altogether?
I was on the Conger for about 7 months, I guess, and then I was on the Burrfish for nearly 2 years.
Can you describe the living and eating spaces on those boats?
To describe the eating spaces, we had rather cramped space for eating, but it was well organized, and gosh, I forget, I think we had 4 tables that could seat about 6 people per table, so we had capability of seating about 24 people, although I think usually it was a few less people than that. Some people, were sleeping with 3 different cycles of the day, different crews, different positions at that time. and the meals. If you were on the midnight thing, you generally would have an opportunity to maybe have a sandwich or something during the middle of the night, but sometimes you missed breakfast or lunch by sleeping. So, but it was very comfortable. Submarine food was the best in the world, and they had the best technically, and seriously, it was the best. And we enjoyed having steak and eggs on Sunday morning, and which you don't find on any other kind of naval ship. And we had good food, well prepared, and very delicious, and it tended to add a little to the waistline of most of the people there.
Everybody talks about the food.
Oh, it's very nice.
And what was your most humorous experience on board a submarine?
Oh gosh, humorous experience. I think probably I was on board I think it was the Conger where this happened. It's hard to remember back nearly 60 years. But we had a second lieutenant, unqualified. He was actually, it looked like he had been eating submarine food for too long a period because he was almost obese. But he was given the position of diving officer, and we had the order to submerge the boat, and he ordered the boat to be submerged, and in that process he has to verify the fact that all of the vents are opened, allow the air in the ballast tanks to escape and give us the weight to submerge. But on that occasion, all of the vents opened except the vent for the bow buoyancy tank, which was right in the very nose of the boat, and it jammed closed. And he failed to notice, and of course the chief of the boat is the one who manages the process of opening and closing the ballast tank vents. He failed to notice, or was slow in noticing, that vent was not opened, and consequently we were having difficulty submerging. The officer ordered more speed and more turn on the bow planes to force the boat down, and he forced the boat down to periscope depth, about 65, 67 feet, and all of a sudden that valve opened up, and when it did, it allowed all of that buoyancy to escape for weight, and the boat went that way. I watched the inclinometer pass 36 degrees down angle, and I watched the depth gauge go around and around until it reached 450 feet. The crush depth on that boat was 500 feet, and the boat was roughly 10 years old, so probably a little bit less than that. Well, in this entire process of the boat tipping down, the captain came through, and he uttered a few words that's probably not proper for me to repeat at this point, but he took his arm and literally knocked that officer on his backside, and took corrective action to get us back up on the surface again. And wasn't a funny incident, but it was funny. But I'm sure that I probably experienced a lot of amusing things, antics that submariners are famous for. You know, baiting new people on board to, compromise their decorum to do foolish things, but I really can't remember.
Well, that sounds
like
pretty
that.
memorable.
It was. That'll always stay with me. It was a dramatic moment.
Huh. And then what role did your submarines play in national defense?
Well, the radar picket boat was unique. There were only 2 of them built, and they were built primarily to be a part of a fleet operation with aircraft carriers and cruisers and destroyers and all, huge conglomeration to take off and meet the enemy. And the radar picket boats were to go out in front, and with our radar capability, we could see where the enemy might be and where we were going. Somehow or another, they failed to understand that submarines on the surface could get up to about 21, 22 knots, which is not very fast. Aircraft carriers cruise at 35 and 40 knots. Which kind of, was not a very good thing, because if we tried to stay out in front of them, we just couldn't do that. So most of our operations ended up being, kind of solitaire, where we would be. We would play like we were out in front of a fleet, and we would, surface and locate various other ships or aircraft in the area, and then make a quick dive after we had got all the information passed on to, whoever needed that information. But it was my impression of radar picket boats was that it was a grand waste of taxpayer money. But fortunately, they only made 2 of them, and after they served their purpose for a few years, no more. So
they figured that out. Huh? Okay, what was the most difficult aspect of submarine service for you?
Qualification. Qualification process requires that you know what every pipe, what every valve, what every switch was for, and how to use it. And every qualified sailor on a submarine has to be able to stand in and operate any of that equipment as needed. And it's a process that, it took me several months to make drawings of all the air lines, hydraulic lines, water lines, whatever, and be able to recite exactly what they were for and where they were located. When in the qualification process, an officer goes with you and says, "What's this?" And you've got to tell them exactly what that is. What's this valve for? Got to explain what that's for. In the control room, we had the responsibility for what's called a manifold that moved water between tanks in the submarine to help balance the weight. If too many of the crew were up forward, the boat's going to tend to drop down that way. So we add water or move water to the back of the boat to balance that. So we were constantly having to move things. And the manifold was kind of difficult to understand how to use and to use it efficiently, but that came with practice and I would say that was probably the most difficult thing. Running the engines and doing maintenance on the engine was easily done.
And what did you like best about your service?
I think traveling into foreign countries and seeing other parts of the world and although that can't say that that's really a part of the service, but it is. Getting to meet people in other areas. On board the Conger, we toured down through the Virgin Islands, and we made landfalls in several ports in that area, and it was nice to be able to communicate with people and see the sights and get an understanding of who the people are and what they represented. And on the Burfish, we did a Mediterranean tour and visited in Italy and at 2 different ports in Italy, and Corsica. We visited a port in Corsica. We visited in Marseille, France. And that was an interesting time because France at that time, back in the early 50s, was communist, and they had a communist government. And the communist government, when the 6th Fleet came in to visit, they said, we want the 6th Fleet anchor way offshore, which they did. But the mayor of Marseille said that he was not communist. He was definitely pro-American. And he asked the squadron admiral if they could send a ship down through the little channel right into the very center of Marseille. And he had 2 submarines. One was the Burfish and the other was the Tench, I believe. And we motored until the channel got too narrow, and we turned around backwards, and we backed in to the center of Marseille, both of us, and tied up. And when we arrived, there was a band.
Oh.
It was an exciting time.
My goodness. That's awesome. All right, well, if you wanted to just share one thing about your military service with your friends and family, what would that be?
I like to tell the story of the officer getting knocked on his butt.
All right.
It's kind of amusing, but it describes the severity of knowing what you are supposed to be doing and knowing what's going on all around you. And if you can't understand why you're not going down, you just can't keep insisting on going down. And you've got to find out why something's wrong. And it's just an example that one little action that is frequently experienced, particularly with newbies on board submarines, is that they will send them, while submerged, send them back to the after torpedo room. There's a head or toilet there, and the toilet drains into what they call a sanitary tank, and the sanitary tank has to be emptied periodically, and that's always done on the surface, and it's vented to the outboard. So they will say, go back and blow sanitary tank while you're submerged, and they would intentionally do that so that whenever he blew the sanitary tank and vented it, all that odor came inside the boat and circulated through the boat. So it's terrible embarrassment, and an example,
Right.
know what you're doing and when you're supposed to have it done and so forth. So that does get kind of interesting at times. I mean, I've seen that happen several times.
Oh, my.
And it's terrible. I think it's terrible to put somebody in a position like that that doesn't really understand. But it's you know, they never do that again.
Teaches a lesson, huh?
Yeah, it's a good lesson.
All
But
right.
it's a tough lesson to learn.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That'll wrap us up here.
Good.
So,
Well,
but,
that's-
yeah. Thank you for your service, and thanks
well,
for doing
thank
the
you.
interview.
Thank you. I can say that I've always enjoyed my service, and I enjoy getting together with submariners from all over the country, and these types of meetings. And I particularly enjoyed having the opportunity to see the technology that's available today. Several weeks ago, I was invited to go up to Groton, Connecticut, and attend a SubVet's meeting up there, and I was one of 5 people that were invited to tour the USS Virginia, and that was quite an experience to see the advancement
I bet.
made
I
with the
bet.
newest of submarines.